Hello, this is Dr. Carolina Kuepper-Tetzel. Thank you very much for joining our talk today. So this is actually a re-recording of the talk that I gave last week. The reason for this is that the microphone we used last week did not really pick up the sound and the audio as well. So it wasn't of a good enough quality to share it with the world. So here I am re-recording this talk for you. So this talk has two parts to it. And the first part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the TILE network, the Teaching, Innovation and Learning Enhancement Network, just briefly introducing the network, simply because the TILE network is being relaunched at the University of Glasgow. So I recently started my position here at the University of Glasgow in the School of Psychology and brought the TILE network with me. Before coming here, there was something similar led by Dr. Emily Nordman at the PET Lab, and the PET Lab is now becoming the TILE network. So what is the mission of the TILE network? Well, first of all, it is based on an observation that I made where different educational sectors and different disciplines often work in parallel and not so much collaboratively together. And when it comes to sharing best practice in learning and teaching and in education more broadly. And the TILE network is an attempt to be that bridge, to be that platform where people from different sectors coming with different expertises can come in and share best practice. And so we have different components for the TILE network. We have a Twitter account, and we would love to have you to follow us. It's under @TILE-network, but we also have different components that we developed over the course of our existence. So the TILE network started at the University of Dundee in 2018 and has been going on now, for 2 years, has been growing, continuously progressing, and I'm very proud of this project, and I hope to grow it further during my time here at the University of Glasgow. So one big component of the TILE network are the speaker series. So the speaker series, we invite external speakers that come in and share their best practice, their expertise in any kind of topic related to learning and teaching and education more broadly. So we had a mixture of speakers with a research background, but also teachers in secondary schools, for example, coming in and sharing their application of evidence-based practices. I'm very excited about the schedule for the TILE speaker series this semester. These are our speakers for this semester. We have many interesting topics that will be covered, topics on supporting autistic students, topics on lecture capture, lecture recordings, and how to embed this in a way to widening access. We have a talk by Dr. Jill McKay on playful learning in professional degrees. And in May, we will have Dr. Yvonne Skipper about mindset-based interventions in the classroom. And so all these talks promise to be interesting talks and talks that can be immediately inform educational practice. So take a look at our website under TILE-schedule there to find out more about those talks and about the speakers. Another component in the TILE network is that all our talks are recorded. Like this one here was also originally recorded, and we will make sure that in the future we have a better microphone so that it's live recorded. But again, we want to make sure that all the talks are recorded, and the recording is made available for everyone worldwide to access and to listen to. And so if you go again on the website and then /tile-recordings, you will find all the recordings from past Tile network talks in order for you to catch up or to re-listen to the talk if there's something that you want to get further understanding of. The next thing we do when we have, when we invited speakers is so-called reflection posts. I always thought and felt that most times when there was an external speaker series, that the speaker came in, delivered the talk, left the room, and with that, maybe a good percentage of that information also left the room. Again, it's not always the case, but in some cases, this happens. And what I'm trying to do with the Tile Network is to capture the talk in form of a blog post, of a reflection post about the talk that captures the main essential ideas of the talk, critical reflection of the talk, and further points to think about that emerge from the talk and from the topic. And so those reflection posts, again, are published on our website and can be read, can be engaged with, you can leave comments and so on. The next thing we like to do in our Tile network is to invite speakers, invite experts to answer a question, a pressing question in education in 1 minute. So these are the so-called Edel Snacks. And again, we have a wide range of researchers and experts that we have invited to answer a question, and they do this in a very short video. Those are fun to watch and can give an initial idea of a specific research field or the answer to a specific question. Again, we had many different people joining us for this project. One of those was, for example, Dr. Emily Nordman, again, who's also here at the University of Glasgow. She talked about pros and cons of lecture capture in higher education, but we went also wider. We had the expert, Dr. Elisa Kim from the University of York, and she talked about and answered a question on student personality associated with academic achievement. In addition to that, over the summer, when we don't have any external speakers coming in, simply because it's usually a downtime for these kind of activities at the university, we started doing interviews with experts in the field where we asked them a couple of questions and they answered the question, and we published the interview on our Tile network. Again, if you go on the website, you will see, I think we have 4 interviews so far, and we will be increasing the number of those interviews next summer, like this summer actually. Another core part of the Tile network is the component of sharing best practice and specifically the collaboration with different schools. So we started with a strong collaboration with the Harris Academy at Dundee. And the idea is if you are a school, a teacher, a lecturer, anyone who does something like an innovative teaching activity, something they really think they want to share with the world, then they can approach us, and we set up a page for them on our website to promote and to describe and present that teaching innovation. So it started with the Harris Academy, but now we have new contributions coming in on a rolling basis. We had a teacher, Eric Anderson from the from Indonesia. He's a teacher there at the Jakarta Intercultural School. And he shared his best practice on how he applies cognitive science approaches to biology instruction in his classroom. We had also Kate Jones coming in. She also talked about her resources that she uses in her teaching, implementing evidence-based practice as well. So again, take a look there under share best practice in our Tile Network website to get some inspiration. And if you are someone who thinks, okay, there's something that I'm doing that is worth sharing with everyone else, please do get in touch, because we're always happy to add new examples of best practice on our website. The Tile Network is proud because it has initiated new collaborations between people who usually would not easily come together or meet each other to collaborate. And again, something that we are very proud of, and we hope to involve different people from different sectors more and more, so that we have like a rich collaborative basis for knowledge exchange. What have people said about the Tile Network? This is just a quote from a lecturer in education at the University of Dundee, Dr. Richard Holm. You can just take a quick read there. Really appreciated the Tile Network and its effect on educators. And then a second quote by Dr. Ken Maurer at the School of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of St. Andrews. Again, saying that it promoted the scholarship of teaching and learning. So again, we're really proud of this, and we hope to continue on that track, on that pathway. So if you're interested in joining the Tile Network and getting updates about what we do when we publish something on our website, make sure to go on our website and to subscribe, which just means that whenever there's new content, you will just get an email that informs you of that. There won't be many emails coming in, but occasionally, if there's something new, you will be notified. Usually when we have a new blog post on a talk, or make an announcement of the next talk, something like that. All right. So again, this was the first part of the talk. The second part is an actual talk about content, about something that I have recently become interested in. So it's the effects of seductive details on memory and transfer. This, the interest in this topic was actually triggered by a review article that I am co-writing or co-wrote. It's currently under review with my colleagues from the Learning Scientists. The Learning Scientists, if you don't know it, is this scholarly outreach project. We are 4 women, all cognitive psychologists, and aiming to disseminate research-informed practice, to translate and to blog about research papers, to make it available to a broader audience, so that teachers, parents, students, and so on can use that research to inform their practice. So we have regular blog posts, we have short videos that explain different effective learning and teaching strategies, and posters and presentations that are free to use. I think, yeah, everyone we meet, they really like that project, and again, that everything is free and accessible for you to use. So again, we were asked to write a review paper on transfer in STEM, and different factors that enhance the probability of transfer or hinder transfer in STEM. And one of those sections was on seductive details. And so that was a section that I wrote, and it inspired me to write this presentation on it, because I think it's something that is very important to know as a teacher or lecturer or instructor. So what are seductive details to begin with? The definition here is that seductive details is any kind of irrelevant but interesting the addition of any irrelevant but interesting and entertaining information to your instruction, to the way you explain target information, target content, the concept that you actually want the student to learn and want the student to remember later on. And sometimes you might add this funny anecdote, this funny images or funny memes into your instruction to make it more interesting. I'm victim of this. I have been doing this in the past. And after learning about the effects of seductive details, I'm actually rethinking the way I'm structuring my lectures right now, or the way I'm using those entertaining details. So why do we use them in the first place? What is the reason to actually introduce seductive details in our instruction and teaching? Well, the primary goal for that is motivation. What we want to do, we want to increase the student interest in the material. We want them to be engaged during the lecture, during the classroom instruction. And one way to achieve this is to add those funny elements to the lecture or to the teaching. This is meant to enhance so-called situational interest. And again, motivation is an important part of learning, of being engaged. And so that's the primary goal why seductive details are used in instruction by teachers and lecturers. On the other hand, another goal, an important goal as well for instruction and education, is actually the learning outcomes, and that students are able to transfer from one context to the next one, to use that knowledge that they learned in the classroom with specific examples to apply it to a new situation later on. And so again, the secondary goal, another goal, not a secondary, but another goal, of instruction and education is to enhance learning performance. And there are different reasons that have been put forward why introducing seductive details may hinder to reach that goal, that increase of performance goal. The first cognitive process that seems to play a role here is attention. So what seems to be the case is that seductive details distract from the relevant information, the relevant target concepts that we are trying to explain and to teach to our students. And if their attention is split between irrelevant and relevant information, it means that there may be a deficit in encoding of the actual relevant details. And this as a consequence of this could lead to a decrease in learning outcomes. The second cognitive process that is suggested is interference. So what could happen is that through the introduction of seductive details, that one funny anecdote, those funny pictures, you actually achieve a disruption in the student in their ability to make links between different relevant and important concepts. So it could disrupt that process of connecting different ideas, of understanding the broader picture of the actual target content that you're trying to explain. And the third process, cognitive principle that could be hindered by seductive details schemas and activation of right schemas. What does that mean? It means that we learn best if we are able to activate prior knowledge and use that prior knowledge to integrate new knowledge into our knowledge network. And providing those irrelevant details could lead to the activation of maybe the wrong prior knowledge. So something that we actually don't want to activate because it may be misleading and may not really help to integrate the new information. And if this happens, for example, in the very beginning of a class, that the wrong schemas and wrong prior knowledge is activated, it leads to a decrease and deficit in understanding of the topic as a whole. Overarching cognitive process that can also play a role here when it comes to introducing seductive details is that it may cognitively overload the learner. So having a lot of different information, irrelevant, relevant information there, and requiring the learner to distinguish between them and adding more of those funny anecdotes could overload their processing and mental resources and lead to, again, a breakdown of processing of the target information as a whole. So cognitive load is something to keep in mind as well as one mechanism through which seductive details can harm learning. So what I want to do is to look at different, or show different empirical evidence of seductive details and its effect on learning and memory and transfer. So the first experiment I'm showing is from Hibernia in 1998. And what they did, they showed, had students read text passages on the process of lightning. And in the base passage, they showed relevant pictures that accompanied the text that described the process of lightning. So this was all relevant information in there. And then there was a seductive details passage where interesting information, but again, information that was irrelevant for understanding the actual concept of lightning. So for example, here, one example of a seductive detail was golfers are prime targets of lightning strikes because they tend to stand in open grassy fields. Again, it's an interesting information. However, it is not one that is needed to understand the concept of the process of lightning. In addition, they had two conditions where in one condition they signaled to the learner which of the parts were the relevant ones by highlighting or by giving them learning goals in advance. And in another condition, they did not do any kind of signaling. So this was to test whether if you introduce seductive details and you just use something like bolding or highlighting of the actual relevant part, if this makes a difference on the effects of the seductive detail. And what they found was, here's the graph and the finding for the two different experiments, one using highlighting as signaling and the other one using learning goals to signal the important ideas. And what they found that in none of those cases, seductive details, the negative effect of seductive details on performance could be reduced. So what happened here is they learned better was the base passage where no seductive details were present, and neither using highlighting or learning goals made a difference for that pattern. The same is true for the transfer performance. So transferring what they learned initially to a new situation. Here again, we find a negative effect of seductive details. So negative details passages performing worse than in the base passage. And again, it did not make any difference whether learning goals were used before or a highlighting of the relevant parts. There are additional factors and learning conditions that seem to play a role for this, how severe or strong the negative effect of seductive details actually is. So one of those variables is when the seductive details actually occurs during the time of instruction. And what seems to be the case is when you introduce seductive details in the very beginning, then that seems to lead to worse performance than if you introduce it at the very end. One idea, again, looking back at the cognitive processes of why this may be the case, is if you introduce seductive details in the very beginning of your instruction, it could be that it activates incorrect schema, the incorrect or misleading prior knowledge. And then if students try to embed or integrate new knowledge into that wrongly activated schema, then this leads to a decrease in understanding of the material as a whole. Whereas if you introduce in the very end, there seems not to be a big negative effect on that. Another interesting factor seems to be the initial interest that the student has in the seductive details. So it seems to be the case that the effect of seductive details is more negative if the seductive detail in itself appears to be more interesting to the learner. So we have something like this. The negative seductive details effect is bigger for information, for seductive detail information, for irrelevant information that is perceived as more interesting to the learner. So what does this tell us? So if you think you found like this very interesting anecdote, this very interesting picture, or the statement that is like super funny and it's hilarious really, and you think you can just add it there for the sake of interest, but it really there's no relevance to further explaining or understanding the concept, you might rethink whether you should put it in or not. One important variable that plays a role on how negative the seductive detail effect actually is and whether it occurs at all is prior knowledge in the learner. So it seems to be the case that the negative effect of, for example, decorative visuals on transfer performance was more severe for students with lower prior knowledge. So Magner et al. In a study in 2014 showed this with students studying geometry. So again, if prior knowledge is high, you have very able and students who have already prior knowledge in the topic, then in some cases you don't even find a negative seductive details effect, but in cases where students are learning something for the very first time, they have no prior knowledge on it. For them, they are trying to make the connections between the ideas and trying to learn these concepts. Then introducing seductive details can be a harming effect on learning performance and on transfer. Again, here, exactly. So positive effects of actually introducing seductive details in instruction in this study was only shown for students on the highest prior knowledge level. This one here, very recent experiment by Edel, Bender, and Renkel in 2019, and they looked at the role of perceived relevance. So really asking the questions, I'm just reading this from the title here, are seductive details seductive only when you think they are relevant? And what they found was that this seems to be, in fact, the case. So if they had one condition where this was a control condition, where no seductive details were introduced or present. And then they had two seductive details conditions. And in one of them, the students were informed about that specific detail is irrelevant. They were explicitly made aware of that this specific detail there is irrelevant for understanding the concept. And in another seductive detail condition, they were not informed about that. So this seductive detail was just present, but they were not told that it was irrelevant. And what they found was that the negative seductive detail effect was only found in the condition where students were not explicitly informed of its irrelevance. So if they think, if you introduce a seductive detail in your instruction and students think it is relevant, then this has a negative effect on recall and on transfer. So there's again something practically really important and has practical implications to keep in mind that, yeah, you know, you still might want to add seductive details because you think, okay, that's something, you know, in a 1 or 2 hour lecture is something that can motivate the student. But again, it's more about thinking about how you're going to introduce this and how you're going to make sure that the student is on the same page as you, recognizing and being aware that that information that you introduced there, that funny anecdote, that's funny meme, or that funny picture, is in fact irrelevant for understanding the target information. In this experiment here by Prowar et al. In 2018, they looked at the actual information processing time of situations when seductive details were present versus when seductive details were not present. So this was a task where students were asked to look at different graphs and to understand those graphs, to extract important information from those graphs. And while doing that, their eye movements were tracked. So they were really interested as well in the information processing aspect of introducing in seductive details. So they had one condition where there were no seductive details, one condition where there was seductive text. So in this graph here, the seductive text was on Parmesan. This type of bacteria is responsible for the smell of cheese or for smelly feet. Again, in itself, an interesting and an entertaining thing to know. However, for the actual understanding of the graph, not relevant. Or seductive visuals were provided, for example, for the apple. And here the results were that even though they did not find actually on performance a difference between the different conditions that they tested, they did find that it took students longer to process the graphs when seductive details were present. So hinting to that distraction component that seductive details can have, it just because there is more information on there that they are taking in, because if you put it on there, they will look at it, and this can distract, be distracting, and they will be processing, for example, graphs like that longer. So the last example, I think, and I want to give for an experiment showing the negative effects of seductive details is this one here. It's one that's more about skill acquisition, where students, medical students, were shown videos, instructional videos on laparoscopic surgical skills. And the videos either included or excluded seductive details. So the picture you're seeing on that slide here, that is one where you have seductive details in form of this jet there flying through the picture present. And they went actually really crazy in regards to the way they actually introduced different types of seductive details, whether it was just visual, whether it was an audio like a sound, or images that were actually moving. So for example, for the last example here, the one that I just showed before in the picture, they gave seductive details as a description and the actual visual. So feeling good at this task, maybe you should sign up for the Top Gun laparoscopic suturing program that surgeons often attend to advance their skills. Tom Cruise is not involved. So things like that, watch those videos under those different conditions. And then the actual performance task, what they used was the actual practical skill to do that suturing skill, so to actually perform that. And this was then rated. And what they found was that students performed better on this transfer suturing tasks without any seductive details present. So when they had watched the instruction videos, but no seductive details were present. They also reported that in conditions where there were seductive details present, that they experienced a higher cognitive load. And later on, using different statistical procedures, they found that this enhanced cognitive load actually mediated the seductive details effect, leading to lower transfer performance. So that's, again, thinking about the processes that are suggested to be involved in the seductive details effect. This is, again, a piece of evidence for how it affects cognitive load in the learner, for example. So when I gave this talk last week, I really crushed some people there because most of the people in the room would or do actually introduce seductive details in their instruction. And again, I do that too, and I did this more maybe before I learned about this topic. And so we can think about maybe there are some boundary conditions that we can pay attention to that still allows us to introduce those motivational, but irrelevant, but motivational details into our instruction. And so one study that has been run by Fries et al. In 2019, what they did, they looked at situations that were high stake. So far, all the different experiments that I introduced you to or I presented to you, those were not really meaningful for the student in regard to that they, the stake was really low. It was an experiment they went to and did that for credits, and that's it. In this study here, what happened was that they raised the stake a little bit of the task, of the material that they were learning. So the participants, they learned material of in mathematics through a video lecture. And then they were told that they had to present that material and explain that material to other people later on, and they would receive a bonus payment for performing well on that test. So the math lectures were either then under a low stake or high stake environment with or without seductive details. So those were the two 2x2 conditions that they tested. And what they found was, on the one hand, is if the learning environment was low stake, they found that there was the classical negative seductive details effect that I have been presenting so far. So worse performance on in conditions that included seductive details versus not. When the learning environment was actually high stake, so they thought they had to give the presentation to someone else, or they received a bonus payment for performing well on a test, actually no negative seductive detail occurred. In addition, they looked at the prior knowledge of the different, of the students, of the participants, and they found that if prior knowledge was high, there was no negative effect of seductive details, and this was completely independent of whether the learning environment was low or high stake. But interesting enough, what they found was for students who had low prior knowledge, they actually performed best in the high stake learning environment when seductive details were present, right? So again, that's the thing with research. You have some evidence for the negative impact, but some boundary conditions maybe available when they are present can actually lead to a different outcome. It's something to think about when implementing this, but because obviously in educational settings, the stakes are usually high because there is, from a student perspective, there is this exam in the very end that they want to perform well on. The only thing we have to think about here is like, is an individual lecture they attend, an individual classroom that they attend, is this something that they perceive themselves as being high stake, or is it something that only in the end they realize, or maybe I should have conceptualized as high stake? So there's something to think about there. So when it comes then to practical recommendations in regard to seductive details, I think we have to take a look at the entire research that has been done, or I have just used obviously some examples from that research. But for me, I think we can distinguish between two factors that are important to pay attention to before introducing seductive details. So the first one are instructor-led factors. These are things that the instructor can do to actually, before implementing seductive details. First of all, the instructor needs to be aware of the prior knowledge of students. So students with lower prior knowledge, they may be not as good dealing with seductive details, and using seductive details in the way that you want them to. So this is something to keep in mind. The second lesson, again, for me is that to clearly point out to students that the seductive detail that you have introduced is irrelevant for the understanding of the main idea. You say something like, this is something completely different right now, so just going to tell you because it's a fun thing, but then we come back to the actual concept and try to really guide that, that instruction in that way. Another thing that has been shown to be effective is to add pre-questions before you actually start any kind of instruction, to add pre-questions that draws the students' attention to the relevant material. This can also reduce the negative effect of introducing seductive details during your teaching. And on the other hand, we have factors that are student-led. So it seems to be the case if you actively involve students and engage students with the material, it also can eliminate the seductive details effect. So for example, systematic note-taking and writing summaries during the teaching that ask them to write down the core important part of the relevant concepts. These are things that can help eliminate the seductive details effect. So for personal reflection then, I think, and moving forward, at least this is what I'm doing in my teaching now, is that I try to keep the cognitive processes in mind through which seductive details can actually affect performance negatively. So I think about the attention part of it, of the interference part of it, of the schema activation part of it, and of the cognitive load. I think about informing students about the relevance of it, so why introduce it in the first place, and that it is irrelevant for the actual understanding of the topic. and to involve students in active tasks during the lecture, during the teaching part, that highlights for them the actual relevant part and concepts of the material. And last but not least, really paying attention to the learner characteristics. Again, what I do as well, again, this is mainly based on, right now, on the different cognitive processes there. But what I'm trying to do is, like, if I'm explaining something that's very complex and I know that students have no prior knowledge in that concept, I take out everything that is seductive, like all seductive details from that, just so that they can really focus on understanding that complicated concept. Okay, that was it from my side. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you at our next Tile Network talk. Please do leave comments. Please do get in touch if you are interested in presenting, or you're interested in contributing to any kind of component of the Tile Network. Thank you very much, and goodbye.